Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Fire These Times. This is a rather special one in that we decided to record it pretty recently in light of what's happening in Gaza. As it happens, just moments really before we started recording, the UN has declared that famine is officially occurring in Gaza. Very specifically, it's I'm gonna have it in front of me, one sec. The Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Initiative, which is a UN system or UN-backed system, has declared that this is basically the final stage because there's a hierarchy of different classifications. Anyway, so things are horrible. There's no other way of putting it. Things are quite bad. Even the last time Isra and I interviewed Maram in Gaza for the Fridays Times, things have gotten significantly worse, and this was just 2 months ago, almost to the day actually. 28th of May is when we released it. And we decided, those of us a few of us will introduce, I'll name them at least briefly in a sec, part of the FTP from the Bravery gang, to do at least an episode to talk about what's happening. Although I dare to say that most people will probably know, at the very least, the gist of what we're talking about. So it's not really about telling you what you don't know, it's more about just sharing some of our reflections. So joining me today are Leila Shami, Karina Avedisian, Daniel Voskoboynik, and Isra, all part of the From the Periphery Media Collective, doing various projects and podcasts. And the first thing I'll ask, whoever wants to start first, and obviously I have my own thoughts and feelings as well to share, is how have you been thinking about what's happening? What are some of the things that you feel you're doing or not doing? Just in general, like we'll start with like as broad of a question as possible. Damn, Isra, go for it.
Um, yeah, I mean, you've kind of captured the situation. It's been uh, horrible, beyond horrible. There is no words. For me personally, I've been trying to, I don't know, I've been trying to balance like the fact that we're watching this genocide and there's no end in sight, and watching it expand day by day into not only other areas in Sudan, in Palestine, but like seeing the replication in places like Sudan. And Sudan has been going on longer, and
Mm-hmm.
places in the Congo, and just the normalization of the violence and the destruction and the deterioration of life. And I've been thinking a lot about this mushroom, it's from the book The Mushroom at the End of the World.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but the reason why I'm thinking about this specific species of mushroom, which I could look up, is because they're known to grow in places where soil is completely eroded and destroyed. And they help rejuvenate the soil. And if the soil is actually rich and healthy, they can't grow there. Yeah, matsutake. And so, yeah, it's the matsutake mushroom. And so I've been trying to pull in that energy of, I know it's going to get worse. It is getting worse. I don't know what to do in this moment. And it's almost paralyzing. And I don't want to get caught up in that paralysis. And I don't want to get caught up in the like, well, like there's nothing to do, so might as well give up and just pretend. Um, and I know there's no way around the fact that life is going to continue to be destroyed in the near future. There's just no way around that. Um, and so I'm holding on to like, okay, even with those truths existing, what could I do to sow other seeds? What could I do to repair in this moment, in hopes that something will come out, and that there is still going to be life at the end of this. Um, yeah, that's how I've been coping lately.
Yeah. Karina?
Yeah, personally, just kind of going from anger to hopelessness to wondering what sort of witnessing everything is doing to all of us on a collective level, to our own humanity, watching like that level of dehumanization. And I worry about us in general. I think I have a certain special anger as an Armenian whose people have also gone through genocide, and kind of, I'm going to maybe speak a bit about genocide studies and how it's failed a bit later, but I think, the whole concept of never again kind of failing again is really kind of hard to witness. In terms of trying to hold on to something that's maybe more kind of productive and hopeful. I'm trying to see what's happening as not sort of like an end, because it does feel like that sometimes, like end of life, end of something, but rather a transformation. And I hope that through this, witnessing these horrors will maybe it will, I'm convinced it will burst something new. I don't know what that thing will be, but I'm trying to kind of focus on that and think about how, my networks and the work that I'm involved in can contribute to that somehow.
Yeah, I think feel free to jump in, Dan, of course. I think I'm exactly that, especially when you said between anger and despair. I'm trying not to. There have been a few moments, certainly in the past couple of weeks, where it's been too much in terms of the just feeling too much, the hopelessness of it all, at least, or just feeling too much, period, that I had to take a step back. This, of course, I already talked about this, but my toddler is basically the same age as when this started, the genocide started. And so I couldn't, and I'm in this is a separate thing, but I've been in this process of working on this book proposal that's all about like mixing the personal and the political. And there's kind of this, elephant in the room monstrosity that's kind of just hanging over me, what I'm thinking about just that topic of like Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, just my own family lineage and whatever. And just because part of what I will hopefully write is like exploring a bit more these what ifs, not in the sense of like alternative histories, but just taking them seriously for what they are and kind of reflecting on them. And here I have this kid who is the kind of the embodiment of a very particular kind of what if, in the sense that had my grandfather, when he was exiled, gone from Haifa, for those who don't know, in 48, gone south instead of north, he very reasonably likely could have ended up in Gaza. For those who don't know, most Palestinians in Gaza can trace family ancestry, and we're talking like one, two generations, and in some cases the people themselves, if they're old enough, to the lands that are now part of the state of Israel. That's why they are in that specific part of historic Palestine. And I mean, of course, all of these things could have come together, and I won't get into it here. This is like a topic for another conversation, but it's been definitely very difficult to prevent some of the images that I've seen from kind of entering my mind when I'm like supposed to just be with her, phones off, phones away, all of that stuff, and it's still kind of there. Kind of the good thing about a toddler is that they require a lot of attention anyway, so that's been good in that sense. Like there's no ifs and buts, there's no negotiations, which has been good in that sense, like on that front. But the anger is what I'm currently feeling and still feeling. And I think I'm not gonna say I'm beyond despair because it doesn't mean anything, but I'm not letting it anymore kind of dominate too much. I do let it in from time to time, but it's not like the main thing anymore because fuck it. And the anger can be productive, and it can also be rage, which is not necessarily, I don't like the term productive, but you know what I mean, generative of something or whatever. Because that can also be paralyzing. When I'm like filled with rage, that can absolutely be paralyzing. I'm not actually doing anything, just in my head. So that's the kind of the balance that I'm trying to strike. And it's not easy because have contacts in Gaza, acquaintances, people I follow, and virtually there's no one who's not affected in a very direct way, if not by the absolute worst case scenario, or by like 1 or 2 degrees, uh, you know, away from that at best, not more than that. There's no, I mean, there are still whatever privileges, all of that still exists, of course, but it's so flattened by just the sheer scale of the horrors. So yeah, there's that. That's been at least for me personally. I don't know if Leila, you want to add?
Yeah, I think for me, I've moved beyond anger towards despair. And when I'm angry, it's usually a time of kind of great motivation for me to engage with stuff, try and do something. But the despair just kind of brings a numbness with it. And um, I don't know. Yeah, it's just unbearable, really. I mean, it's been a very difficult period in Syria as well, which is very close to my heart, and Gaza, where I worked for 3 years. So it's a place that I know very well. I have a lot of friends there. And, it's very hard to see the images and the messages that are coming out of Gaza and reconcile that with the image of the place that I used to know. I mean, our listeners can't see us, but everybody on this call has exactly the same look of absolute
Yeah,
exhaustion on
yeah,
their face.
yeah. I definitely feel it.
Yeah.
Um, Even if I have an okay night's sleep, it doesn't really change much, to be honest. For me, it's the fact that at every step of the way in
Mm.
the past almost 2 years, with pretty much no exception, the next step was predictable. You know, the how worse things can get has not been rocket science, has not been a mystery. It's not the people who didn't think this was possible. I'm not talking about those quote unquote like us who maybe didn't think about it because they were worried and it's too horrible and whatever. But I'm talking about those who continue to claim or to kind of hang on to this notion that something as horrible as this would not happen because they insist on the myth of respectability when it comes to Israel. I see this constantly, and that's another source, like parallel to what's happening of anger. As you know, like I spend a lot of my time doing, for lack of a better term, media studies, and so I can, with almost no exception, just open any channel in the UK. I live in the UK. And even when there's a good report, even when the investigation itself is well made or whatever, what usually gets me is like the commentary that comes afterwards. There are exceptions to this, but as a general rule, and I will say that in the past week or so, I've seen less of this. I think probably because it's too horrific to even have that kind of usual filter. But still, with that, I recently published a piece on Shadow Mag on the BBC having the former leader, whatever, of the IDF's Gaza battalion, basically. And this was part of a series of different interviews where everyone else was critical of Israel, even those who were kind of like quote unquote moderate, like moderately critical, like no one was pro. This need to still have a representative of the IDF somehow give the other side of this genocide or whatever is that's what really gets me. Because there's no way to interview someone like that and not either do like what Piers Morgan might do and just have him for like the shock effect and maybe yell at each other, and that's what you want to get out of this. Or in one way or another, allow him to basically whitewash the genocide. Like there's no other reason. He provided no concrete addition. There's nothing that he could say even that's of value that can't be said by just a random person. And that's what really gets me. It's the kind of the I shudder to use the term banality because it's not quite appropriate here, but there's an element of this where I don't even know if it was too deep of a thought that when they were deciding who the guests would be, for example, like whether they thought too deeply about, oh, let's have this guy on or whatever, whether it's just something more routine to have on, like this is just what we do. We need quote unquote two sides, therefore we need an Israeli, not just an Israeli, but a literal ex-IDF who was I forgot his official title, like leader of the Gaza battalion or whatever, something like that. That's what got to me. Those are the specific things that get to me. And in the context in the UK, especially of just the sheer farce around the UK government pretending that it is now concerned. And as we're speaking now, we're recording this on the 29th of July, in the early afternoon. Around this time, Starmer has called in an emergency meeting, cabinet meeting, supposedly about the Gaza emergency. Among the things on the table is whether to accept to recognize Palestine as a state now or eventually, whatever that means. So this is where we're at, you know? We're at the stage where it's as if like Oslo was like last year. the Oslo Accords of 20 plus years ago, and we're still talking about we'll just we'll just recognize the thing that doesn't exist, and hopefully this will put pressure on Israel. And I understand the people campaigning for this. I'm not blaming them. It is something to do. I'm not blaming them. I'm just pissed more broadly that this is kind of still where we're at when, as I mentioned, all of the steps that have happened since October 2023 and even before then could have been easily prevented in more than one way. And we're just not. They were just not. Either direct complicity, as obviously with Biden and then Trump, the Germans, the various European powers, and the UK included, and so on, or basically, through inaction, quote unquote. And we're here. And the kind of the horror for me, and it is one of the things that I'm still struggling with thinking, like to think about is we're saying this is feels like the end of, and this is kind of like the final phase, but it's never is. There's no such thing as an end of. There's no such thing as like, well, we've reached famine, as if now, all it's just gonna happen. No, no, nothing. At every step of the way, there could still be an intervention. At every step of the way, something can still be done. People can still like lives can be saved. People can be saved from malnutrition, let alone famine. All of these things can happen. None of this is beyond the realm of what is feasible as like a human community or whatever. In fact, it's relatively easy. The difficulty is Israel. The obvious problem is that France and Spain are going to drop food from the air, which is in and of itself very dangerous, and some people have been killed in Gaza with those. But the problem remains that there is a state that is explicitly preventing food and aid from entering Gaza. There was an interview on, and I'll end on this point, my bit now. There was an interview on one of the breakfast shows here in the UK, which is one of the most viewed ones, which kind of tells you how kind of this has broken into the mainstream, if you want, with a doctor who recently came back from Gaza, and he's been there a bunch of times. And he said that like the soldiers, the Israeli soldiers, were explicitly were just taking away baby formula from those doctors that came into Gaza, that were going to Gaza knowing that there's a shortage, so they were bringing their own supply of baby formula, and the Israelis would just take those. They would let them take everything else, but just take those. And there's only one reason you would do that. It's not rocket science. It's not rocket science. The policy is explicitly to target children. Like it's pretty obvious. And I don't know how this isn't just the front page at every, or the first thing you start with at every step of the way, whenever you're talking about the crisis in the Middle East, which is still the fucking headline on the Guardian as I'm looking at it right now on my right, Middle East crisis live. Whatever
It's
that
been the
means.
same headline for the
It's been the
past
same
20
headline.
years at least.
Exactly. Or that part of the world, that other sentence that I hate. But it's where we're at. This is what I mean when I say that like I'm tired of this almost the social pressure or whatever that's imposed to pretend that we're not seeing what we're seeing, that we're not witnessing what we're witnessing, that we cannot name the thing that is the most obvious thing ever. Even the B'Tselem and Physicians for Human Rights Israel just yesterday declared it to be a genocide. Very late, obviously, but even they did it. And so, like, who's left? Like at some point, it's like it's gonna be basically everyone. And we all. This is okay. I'll end on this point. Sorry. I do think we're gonna get to the point where it's gonna be actually widely recognized that what is happening here is a genocide. It's like that book. One day, everyone will have always been against this by Omar Akkad, who we may have on the Friday Times at some point, hopefully. And that's the bit that really, really gets to me the most, is that this is not a mystery. This is not we don't know what's happening behind those death camps. No, no, we know. It's live. It's on 4K at this point. It's in 4K. That's the bit that really, really gets to me. What happens next? I don't know. I'm trying not to kind of let my mind run into kind of this inevitabilities, because if there's one thing we've learned, I think the hard way, is that most predictions are useless. So I'm trying to just maintain a bit of that hope, effectively, of like what are the things that can be done, trying to identify them as much as I can, and when I do manage to just do them, even if I don't know what the impacts would be, but to just do them anyway.
Yeah. I start to feel a little crazy because I look around me and I'm just like, is no one else seeing this? Like, how are we still trying to defend this? Like, how are we all not taking our pitchforks and storming and like just not just even like the hypocrisy of everything, because then you start to seeing it like playing out in different ways, and I'm like, I don't understand what happens to the human psyche, that it could continue to deny what is in front of them, like what physically is there. So what is happening internally, and what is happening in the mind that like what is it doing to twist what's it's seeing into something completely different? And it doesn't like I've been like looking into like doing these like this research on journalism in general and like ethics of journalism, and I'm like reading this stuff and I'm like, these people really believe that they're being ethical by showing the two sides. Oh no, we have to show the total truth. Like, but and to question, like acknowledge, in a lot of ways they acknowledge their own bias, but their acknowledgement of their own bias is essentially playing out the bias of like the two-way, right? So like these contradictory statements, and they're so proud of themselves and like, look, we're this and that. And it's like, I don't know, I'm just really, how do you undo that is the question I'm in, because it feels like no matter what, and I know that there's a lot of examples of people resisting and doing otherwise, right? This is part of the reason why I did the mutual aid podcast, is I wanted to highlight more of those that do an experiment and like break away from this like brainwashing. But it's such a huge, it's the dominant main existing way of being, is to take in this stuff, to think that everything is equal somehow, and deny what's literally in front of you, right? And constantly be erasing the past. And so like every single moment that's happening is a brand new moment, right? Which obviously makes it so much easier to then forget like not see the patterns, not believe what you're seeing, and give you, I guess, a blank slate of like, well, this time is going to be different. Yeah. And so I'm really like, I start to feel a little crazy, because I'm like, am I the crazy one, or is there like what's happening, or how easily is it going to be for me to then like become something like that, right? Like, how do you not become a fucking tanky when you're seeing this shit happen, and like not believe that like the only way to do it is to meet their shit with our like the same force and the same violence. And I don't violence, yes, and self-defense, yes, like for protecting and honoring life. But there's always a fucking, I feel like once you take a life, there's something that happens there, and you have to really content with and hold whatever that life is. And so, yeah, it gets me going into really dark spaces of human existence and death and life, and the interplay of the two. And like, how do you not be that, but also how do you resist someone who does not even see you as like worthy of life? And that piece is like, yeah.
I think it won't surprise anyone when I say that like Baldwin has helped me think this through, James Baldwin. There is a power in, so the way he framed it, that usually, of course, as a black man, he was talking about white people and often to white people. And he did recognize at some point, it's a kind of, I guess, now famous since the documentary a few years ago of like, I am not the N-word. I've never been that. No one I know, who's black has ever been that, and yet there is that category. It exists out there. And then what needs to happen, basically, what has to happen is that it's white people that have to figure it out, because they are the ones that invented that creature, that character, that whatever, that never actually existed. It's a purely fictional creation that came out of fiction, out of a need to justify the institution of slavery, obviously. It came after the institution of slavery, or like, as the slavery was already there rather than before. And that, to me, that there's something powerful about that, and there's also a way of reclaiming your own agency. So I'm trying as much as I can, and again, I'm saying this with all of the caveats in the world, not to let the dehumanization make me feel dehumanized. Partly out of a fuck it, or mostly, and partly out of a I think I understand where it comes from, and there's a power to knowing that. Like there is an origin story to that. That wasn't always the case or whatever, which of course has nothing to do about excusing it whatsoever. It's actually more into like recognizing that there is a fundamental weakness in the sort of world or society or whatever that has these sort of projections, creations, like the N-word in the case of what Bolton was talking about. And fundamentally, right now, like I can, again, it's what I mentioned earlier, like having a kid who is that age, born 1 week after October 7th in 2023, I can sort of see this hard, clear example of like how she's being treated despite, regardless of her identity in many way, which at this age doesn't really come into play anyway, because of where she is and how she's coded, white passing, a name that can kind of be a bit of anything, or whatever, and how that same exact child would have been treated had she been in Gaza. And again, had this kind of historical what ifs happened differently, not even that many different like degrees of separation, right? And for me, that's kind of revealing because it tells me that it's like, even though I know this intellectually, but I can also feel it that like that means that every single child, and again, I knew this already, but I can also see it now, like even more concretely, every baby, every toddler, every child, and of course, every civilian, period. I'm just talking about children here, in Gaza is the same as her, is identical to her. Toddlers are toddlers, you know? There is a universality to it. That's why, like, for those who don't know, Mrs. Rachel, who's kind of this popular online children's educator, has been doing a lot on Palestinians in Gaza and with Palestinians in Gaza. This started because she was seeing videos, not just like from like her own side, like seeing videos from Gaza, like everyone has for the past couple of years almost, but because she saw videos of people in Gaza, like kids, parents in Gaza, showing them her videos. And that for her was kind of this clear, kind of juxtaposition. And she's just had a kid like who's 6 or 7 months old now, I think. And she recently also did a video, showing a baby in Gaza who's the same age as her own, but clearly doesn't look the same. And she literally said that this is what a baby of this age should look like. It's kind of this like, it cannot get clearer than this. Like nothing else matters, basically. Like it doesn't matter whatever ism you want to use, whatever justification, whatever what about, like none of this, all of this collapses. And that's for me very powerful in the sense like she's not necessarily a political actor in the traditional sense of the term, but she is in the other sense of the term. And that's for me like it fuels me in a sense of like they want that obvious connection. People who commit genocide want that obvious connection to be severed. They want to. I'm thinking of like Schindler's List, and there is a scene, a horrible scene. I think it was towards the beginning of the movie. I haven't seen it in a while, where there's like a grandmother who's thrown off of a balcony, and she's like in a wheelchair or something. And to get to that point, where like the person doing that either doesn't think twice about it, or even if he does it anyway, you have steps. It takes steps. You're not born like this. No one is born like this. And the anger that I have is that those steps have been clear for a long time, and they would not have been possible if it was just Israel. If it was just Israeli society going down that route of fascism, it's just not possible in this integrated world of ours. It's just not possible. Eurovision still has Israel, FIFA still has Israel, the EU still has normal relations with Israel. They're now discussing like partially suspending some of the funds or whatever. Like, had all of this been like as clear cut in many ways as what they did with Russia, which could also be critiqued as not enough, obviously. I have difficulties imagining Netanyahu being as brazen, as confident, and as whatever as he's been in the past couple of years. If the consequences were that high that early, and they're not even high, and it's already too late. Which doesn't mean to reiterate that point that like nothing like that we shouldn't still be pushing for it because it's gonna be too little, too late regardless. But there's like degrees of that, and we should still push on that regardless.
I think I was thinking about the comment, your point about Miss Rachel and this how kind of special it is that she keeps her eye on the ball. She keeps her eye on like what's actually really important. But on the flip side of that, it's actually quite shocking and horrible to see media, talking heads, societies in general kind of so easily fall into these like bullshit debates about semantics, over what this really is. There's like a friend of mine had written on Instagram this quote that, when it seems like when there's a genocide underway, it's as if everyone kind of consents to this sort of collective stupidity. Like, what is genocide really? Is it even knowable? And I think the juxtaposition of that reality plus all of us having phones and watching what's happening in real time and that kind of cognitive dissonance is really something to behold. And as Esther said, it's like crazy making because it seems like some people just it's as if normal life is going on and you're kind of debating this abstract, idea. I'd recently read an article in Plus 972 magazine by Emilio Dabed, where he's kind of critiquing all of the ICJ in granting provisional measures in the Israel v. South Africa, or it's the other way around, I don't remember. So, it granted provisional members, acknowledging that Israel's actions in Gaza could plausibly amount to genocide, and that the situation was grave enough to warrant emergency measures. But despite that, he's kind of arguing that the court failed to take that one step that could have halted the atrocities, ordering an immediate and lasting ceasefire. And the argument is interesting. He's saying, like, because of that ruling, and because the ICJ directed Israel to take like all measures within its power to prevent genocidal acts, that kind of led everyone to start, it led everyone to this really kind of surreal space of like prolonged deliberations, as if its claims to be mitigating the very crimes we were all watching it do should be kind of taken at face value. And that uh, you know, the ICJ's failure to act in the, way it really could, not only enabled the violence to persist, but like morphed the conversations about it into like legal procedures, diplomatic ambiguity, and all this. And it's just incredible to me how easily we fall into that when, we all see what's going on. So, yeah.
And I think Daniel is going to say something, which is before that, Karina, you had mentioned about the genocide studies, kind of the failures within that field. And I'll just mention briefly that I've had Amos Goldberg on, of course, on the Friday Times like a couple of months ago. And it was not largely, but like a good chunk of it was on that specific topic. And he had argued almost over a year ago now that there is a clear failure within a genocide and a Holocaust studies, because he's a scholar of both specifically. So the Holocaust specifically and genocides more broadly, that the way he framed it, I mean, we don't have to get into it as much because I want to get your take into it and people can just listen to that episode, is that there's kind of a bit this, how do you say this, like this intrusion from the legalistic world into the field of history. Is that, for example, the question of intent and all of that stuff is a legalistic matter, and how to determine it has to do with very specific legalistic tools. But it doesn't mean that you can't know and see that this is clearly genocide. Those are two separate cognitive processes, basically. And the fact that one has dominated or has become to dominate more and more the field of history, specifically when it comes to genocides, is problematic to say the least. And I'll just stop there because people can just check out that episode specifically. But yeah, I just wanted to have your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think, with genocide studies, it's painful to me personally because, genocide studies was built on, the back of the Holocaust and the Armenian genocide, those two crimes specifically. And that the field had kind of, justified its existence through its stated commitment to prevention. And to watch some academics kind of edge, dangerously close to rationalizing genocide, minimizing what is arguably one of the gravest atrocities, risks undermining not just that, but the seriousness with which kind of all forms of mass violence are treated and seen. And I know that the International Association of Genocide Scholars, IAGS, they're online, I mean, they've been really vocal about Ukraine. They've been really vocal about the Rohingya, but it's remained conspicuously silent on Gaza. And I think since October 7, it hasn't issued a single statement on Israeli actions. But I have kind of insider information that they're going to be releasing a statement in a few days. But I mean, I think that also speaks to the fact it's not just IAGS, it's other genocide studies associations, different ones in different contexts. But there's been a lot of talk of like internal disagreements. There's like fear of speaking out. There's other scholars who are pushing for it, but just the fact that there is this like contention even within the field is just so damning, and it's led a lot of scholars to wonder, is there going to be genocide studies even like after this? I mean, if, as far as the form it's in now, because it doesn't look like it's tenable. It's completely lost all its kind of moral, stance or ground that it was standing on.
I mean, it feels like genocide is just becoming another way to do politics. This isn't the first genocide we've seen in the past decade. This isn't the first time in the past decade that we've seen mass starvation of a civilian population being used as a weapon of war. That's, I think, what terrifies me is that we're entering a world where this has become normalized. This is a way that states deal with undesirable populations.
We'll try to say a few things and I'll lose my composure. Sharing some words from what used to be the Warsaw Ghetto. Just 3-4 meters from me is the site of what used to be the largest synagogue in the world, which today is a skyscraper holding a bank. Warsaw and this part of the world can be a brutal place to work in the best of times. And in these times, without even any kind of redemptive story that emerges from it, knowing that the same horrors of this place are repeating themselves, is even more brutal. And there's a particular insidious horror of watching also people wrapping themselves in Israeli flags, often 17, 18-year-olds, youth from Israel on trips to this part of the world, trips of indoctrination, taking pictures in front of murals saying never again, connecting and justifying a genocide on the back of another one. I'm in a place of the abyss of horror. I think there's something also about the crime of starvation. I mean, genocide is multidimensional, but there's something about starvation in particular which touches us from the inside and makes the guilt of even being in a position of access to food accessible on a daily basis, something I'm struggling with. But I think that the only hope that I have is I think we need the unthinkable to stop the unthinkable. There is so much that we can't stop. But at this point, I think hearing the stories also in this land where people escape genocide using the most ingenuous and imaginative types of techniques, I still have a tiny bit of hope in what might emerge in the next months and years. It might not be enough to save many, many people that should have been saved. We should have never been in this situation. There are so many mistakes, organizing strategies that weren't done that I'm sitting with. But it's not hope. I think hope is way too stable of a word. But if anything, I have the indignation pushes me also to make a call out to people wherever they are. I hold on to the words of, Rabbi Abraham Heschel. There's few forms of constriction that are worse than the constriction of the human heart. There's no freedom in having your heart constrained, in not accessing the humanity of opening up to the humanity of other people. So just again, calling out, especially folks in the Jewish diaspora, to connect to the deepest humanity of themselves and to wake up and to do what's possible within their circuits, within their family circuits, to shake things up in whatever it looks like for them. It's such a besmirchment of the memory of everyone here, of everyone in Palestine. And yeah, I don't really have any coherence at all. I think coherence almost feels also absurd in the midst of the abyss. But if there's anything to be learned, is that we have to hold each other. And I think something that makes what's happening in Gaza even worse is the broader context, seeing a network of concentration camps being built around the world, seeing the explosion of fascisms. It would be already too much if it was just what's happening in Palestine, but the spiral that I think a lot of us find ourselves in so many contexts makes us feel even more horrifying. And I think we need forms of solidarity that I don't think we can even understand or imagine right now, but will be indispensable to at least keep us in a position of having a world worth holding together. It's as much as I can say from here, but yeah, and bless the memory of everyone as well.
Thanks, Daniel. Um, I guess we can like slowly wrap up. This was just an episode meant to be honestly what it ended up being. And I'm very grateful to all of you. I'm actually just struck just right now as I kind of have the five of us of the screen, just like the connections are quite something. Daniel calling us from basically the Warsaw, or what used to be the Warsaw Ghetto. And of course, Gaza has been compared to the Warsaw Ghetto pretty explicitly for the past couple of years. Layla, with your Syria experience, obviously as a Syrian, but also someone who's been in Gaza, who lived there for 3 years. Karina, with of course your Armenian heritage and connection, and how genocide continues to impact your life, I guess it's fair to say. And Isra, of course, is someone who's been more even directly involved with like Gaza-related mutual aid, and just like this kind of this big haunting that has now become in many way. Um, yeah, I don't know. As I guess echoing a bit what Daniel said, like I'm just grateful that we're able to hold this space, period, because it's not easy. Many things have happened for even this call not to happen, so I'm grateful for that, for whatever it's worth, even if it's like for posterity or whatever. Um, what I people, I mean, feel free to share like final thoughts or whatever, of course. And what I will just say, at least at this stage, and I do think like we'll do more of these when the time is sort of right for them. I will say quickly that we may do another episode with Maram, who was on the podcast. I'm gonna try and organize it, but for obvious reasons, it may not be possible. I'm still in touch with her. She is not okay, to put it mildly, but I'm grateful that she's at least with us and still able to write stuff, and she's published on Al Jazeera just like the other day and stuff. So like I'm grateful for that at least. I think the fact that it's almost like, I don't know, we've gone through this process, and this is kind of a broad collective we, and it may not apply to everyone, so maybe I'm just talking about myself and projecting here, I don't know. But there's been this sense of like, you know, can this happen? This almost a shock reaction. Like, can it really get there? Are we really going there? And what and all of the steps. And of course, people immediately think of the images that they have from mass culture, from movies, from series of like what the death camps were, and the Nazis and the goose stepping and all of the authoritarians and all of that stuff. Um, and what I'll say is that there is something which is not easy to identify, but it doesn't mean that it's not there. There is something important in the fact that even that conversation has been happening. Again, with all of the caveats that this comes with, not enough people, not as, etc., etc. But what I'm trying to say is that because it's not nothing, and we know, especially from, I'm thinking of Primo Levi, who I've read a lot, him talking about how there was this sense up until the bit where he was obviously he was arrested slash kidnapped, whatever, and sent to the concentration camps, which he thankfully survived and wrote about it and stuff. There was a bit of him that was always sort of in denial of it happening almost as it was happening. Like he couldn't quite wrap his head around like it could be this barbaric, this brutal and whatnot. And in his case, it was because there was this sense that like something like this could not happen in quote unquote enlightened Europe. That there would still be kind of these rules of war and blah blah blah, all of that stuff. And of course, he had to forcibly dispel that illusion and that myth. And I think the the faster we do, the better it is. Not to sink into cynicism and despair, on the contrary, to actually recognize that like there are certain things that have been achieved, and that's a good thing, and they were never guaranteed. They were never the rights that were won, the progress that was made, none of this at any point has ever been guaranteed. And there is something, again, it's difficult to kind of, you know, put my finger on it necessarily. I just kind of, it feels more like ghostly. I don't know if that's the correct term, but like more, not abstract, but yeah, like it's not as concrete as I would like it to be, at least at this stage. But it's there. And I think it's important to bring it back. I don't know what I'm saying, but it's important to like recognize it for what it is, because this is not the 1940s. We're not there. This is not just a repetition of what it is. And there are multiple more things that could be done today that, again, will still be too little, too late, regardless. But it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be done. And it's not satisfying, to put it mildly. It's not, as I said, not going to be enough regardless, but we should still be thinking along those lines because we can. And I'm not hungry. And that's, I can think about people who are, because fuck it again. Like, I'm accepting this as the new normal. And how there was a video yesterday, I posted it on Blue Sky as well, and I'll end on this, of like a man, a father, I think, I don't know, a man coming back into the house in Gaza and into the home, and like with a big bag of flour, and then he collapses when he arrives. Out of fatigue, out of joy, out of both, I don't know. But like everyone else, like the family, the kids, the elderly, his wife, sister, I don't know, everyone else in the family, like celebrating. And I had this moment, and I shared that exact kind of thought process of like both relief, like, oh, they got, and also like, what the fuck? Like, I'm relieved that they got some fucking flour, you know? And I'm relieved that this is now the new baseline, and no, it can't be. It just cannot be. It's just not something that can ever be normalized in that sense. And that's what I mean about pushing back against this sort of despair, as understandable as it is, and as I feel it a lot of the time, because concretely, this is what it would mean to people who are actually on the ground. Not to, sorry, not to say that like what we feel is what's going to happen, obviously, but it's just part of this process of like, it's part of what we can be doing, and we need to also be in a certain mindset in order to do certain things. That's what I was trying to say. So I'll end on that, and whoever wants to kind of add thoughts and whatnot, please feel free, and then we'll just wrap up.
Yeah, I agree with, like, I think this is the moment where, like Daniel said, we have to get creative. Both like people in Gaza, and you see that creativity, you've seen it from day one, and those of us outside who are like hitting all the walls, and it's very clear that those above, this is what they're planning. This is easing the way for the rest of us, what we're going to be experiencing in one way or another in the future, and in many places already starting to experience. And I think this is why it's like one of the things, right? I'm engaging in the mutual aid work in Gaza. People are not giving as much. Maybe it's associated with the despair. Maybe it's the fatigue. Maybe it's the fact also the economy is crashing and people are scared. And so like they have less to spend, whatever it is. I kind of want to remind people that is just as important, even with the prices skyrocketing. Give to community kitchens, give to individuals. People need, this is it. This is the only source of like income, and not even income, just like a lifeline to be able to get some, maybe buy another day or a few more hours or whatever it is, or stave off like the bodily devastating effects of hunger, which is like you're starting to see that conversation being had. But even if you're like, part of the famine and the starvation is what happens to your body. And so even if they have enough money to be able to purchase something to help stave off those effects, that buys more time. We'll put in a link to the kitchen that I've been supporting. I mean, a week ago, I saw on my feed videos of people in Egypt putting lentils and rice in bottles and throwing it into the ocean in hopes that maybe it'll get there. And a few days later, those bottles did start to wash up. So like, get creative, figure it out in any other way. And yeah, we got to figure out ways to push back. These little things are ways that are erode the powers.
I think we can no longer ignore that we live in a world that's indifferent to human life. I think instead of despairing, though, this should be a call to build horizontal coalitions, build mutual aid, to fill some of these important gaps in human care that are left by states. And I'm glad for this collective, because I think we operate in that kind of in that sort of spirit.
I would say very briefly, first, fascism thrives through disorientation. So maintaining at least some semblance of like looking at the reality with a groundedness is an act of resistance. The second is the great historian of the Warsaw Ghetto, Shmuel Kassav. I've repeated this quote before. I think really aptly said that the catastrophe of catastrophe is that it erases everything but the catastrophe. Part of the resistance to genocide is also not accepting its own narrative of inevitability. We don't know what the future is going to look like. We have the choice of either of succumbing to despair, which is understandable, but at least of attempting something and trying to alter the reality, but at least resisting that what genocide tries to impose is a catastrophe, and to only let you see that. That's one act that we can do. And finally, this is a more like personal fall, but the Palestinian artist Ahmed Tabasi has called for the Jewish Intifada. I think it's underway already, and it's much smaller and much less powerful than we'd want. But I think this is a call for organizers from all backgrounds to get connected with diasporic movements. There's real strength there that we can build, and enormous things we can achieve together, and let's make it happen.
And Layla, I actually have an example I want to end on, but I want you to hear your thoughts first.
I mean, just to end on a positive note, we should take some strength from the amazing solidarity work that's being done all around the world and the different initiatives. People in every continent have been mobilizing and doing things for Gaza, and we may feel very powerless in the face of the fact that states are not moving to prevent this atrocity from happening. But I think everything that's being done is contributing to a broader movement. And maybe I could suggest that we do an episode another time in the near future, looking at some of those initiatives that are happening around the world, so we can have something more positive to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. The example I would give, and we'll end on that. It's not a good example, like it's not a positive example, but it's one that does drive home this the main argument that I think all of us have said in different ways, that like it's not true that there's nothing that can be done. Um, Walter Benjamin, sorry, Walter Benjamin, probably most people know this, died by suicide. He was a Jewish German intellectual, died by suicide trying to escape Nazi Germany. He died on the French-Spanish border. And the reason he killed himself, he died by suicide, is because Franco at the time had canceled all transit visas. It's a very concrete thing that happened. And so what this meant is that as he was crossing into Spain, the police there, the border police, forced him back into France. And fearing that he would be, of course, captured by the collaborationist regime in France and sent back to the Nazis, and obviously then be killed there. His brother actually died in concentration camp later on. He took a lot of morphine, and that's how he died in a hotel by the Spanish-French border. The decision by Franco to cancel the transit visas, had it happened like a week later, Walter Benjamin would not have died at that border. Just this one single event that happened, and putting pressure on someone like Franco at the time, probably not as feasible in many ways as what most Brits today can do in terms of putting pressure on Keir Starmer. There's like a different level of difficulty. Of course, this very much depends on where you are, and this is not applicable everywhere. But in the sense that we're not at this, we're not in that world. We're not in that situation. There are elements of that situation that do exist today, but there are also elements that are not that situation. And we shouldn't we shouldn't forget that. We shouldn't underestimate that. And we should personally always act as though we can actually do it, for better or worse, even though that's more often than not the case. Or that's not, it won't get us what necessarily we need. And I'll end on that in the sense that every single life that can be saved in any concrete way right now at the stage should be for me, is my kind of my motivation. And with that, and soon after that, assuming we can actually stop this process, specifically the famine, from getting worse and worse and worse, because as we said, it's like the final stage of the classification. But what this means is that the famine has begun. It doesn't mean that we have to allow it to continue forever, etc. All of these things, and this is horrible to even think about, but it's kind of the difficulty of the moment, is what I'm trying to wrap my head around. And on this, I do think somewhat positive note, a hopeful note, even though the context in and of itself does not offer hope in and of itself. But that's I think that's my motivating factor. And we'll end on this. I'm very grateful for the four of you for like joining us for this rather special episode, I suppose, of Defy These Times. And all of the links that are relevant, we'll put those in the show notes. And yeah, thanks a lot, guys.